So today on Everyday Injustice, we are joined by a whole host of former and one current intern. Um, so, one of the interesting things, although we have all UC Davis students, which is really interesting because over the last 2 years, we've really gotten to the point where we are completely spread around everywhere from UCLA to Berkeley, San Francisco, and UC Davis. But we'll start here with Lynchy, who actually just started law school at UCLA. Lynchy, tell us a little bit about your experience as an intern and what it's been like to transition to law school.
Yeah, so hello everyone. Like David said, my name is Lynchy. I'm currently a 1L at UCLA Law, and I interned for the Vanguard for almost a year between 2020 and 2021. And that was a really cool opportunity for me because I've always been interested in criminal law. And by getting to monitor actual live cases, I got to see what the courtroom dynamic is like, but most importantly, how defendants are treated in court. And I feel like you get to see a lot of the misunderstanding that takes place, a lot of how sometimes there's poor representation or way harsher sentences for minor crimes. And right now, I'm taking criminal law in my first semester, and we are touching certain aspects of that, such as, harsh punishments for misdemeanors, how mass incarceration is created. And I think it's really cool getting to, before I even started law school, I already got to be exposed to these certain injustices that I got to see in person. And a lot of it really motivated me to be more involved in criminal justice related activities. And then now that I'm in law school, I'm involved in projects where I could, explore more about how incarcerated people are treated either in the courtroom or in prisons, and try to be more involved now that I got that exposure and experience from the Vanguard.
And Alex, you're the current intern at this point, although Lynn still does some work with us, especially with the UC Davis program. But what's your experience been like?
Hi, my name is Alexander Ramirez. Like David said, I'm currently a fourth year poli-sci major at UC Davis, so I'm going into my last year here. Um, well, my experience at the Vanguard has been interesting because I joined around the beginning of 2021, around January. That was my third year, and a lot of change has come to the Vanguard. I think David can attest to that. There was at one point like 70 people in a meeting, uh, our weekly Monday meetings. So the Vanguard kind of had to change with that. I know we added different like divisions, like we have Yolo County, Alameda County, right? As opposed to before when everyone was just checking into one single group chat. But we couldn't do that anymore just because of the large amount of people we had. But other than, the heavy amount of change I've seen, it's been interesting. You know, Beforehand, I thought court was much more theatrical, I guess, like how you see in the movies, where it's like, oh, objection, overruled, right? But it's not like that. It's a lot more tame. There's a lot more time that goes into different cases. Like it's not unusual for someone to be called up and all they do is assign a public defender. And then they say, oh, we'll put this up for 3 weeks. So I think it was kind of a huge shock to me to see how different the court system was. Of course, there's also writing articles. That's really fun. That's also helping me improve my writing. Overall, I think the Vanguard has been like one of the most valuable things I've done in my time in college. So I really appreciate them giving me the opportunity to join and do all of this.
And Lynn and Julietta, you guys are kind of, the holdovers from our old school, in that you guys were actually part of the internship program when we were still meeting in person and still going to court in person. And then you continued through the shutdown and kind of a big transition. What's that been like?
Yeah, so my name is Julietta. I joined the Vanguard beginning of 2020 in January when it was still in person. And it's been really interesting to see how much it's changed, going from going to court in person to having to watch the live streams online. It's been a really interesting experience, and seeing how the courts had to adapt to the pandemic. But like Lynchy and Alex already mentioned, the Vanguard has definitely been a really amazing opportunity for me as a journalism student wanting to cover specifically the criminal justice system. I think I've definitely learned a lot through this opportunity, and even though I'm not going into law or anything, it's definitely informed my reporting and how I approach these different systems.
And Lynn?
Hi, I'm Lynn. I also started my internship with the Vanguard in January of 2020 when we were going into in-person court. I missed that aspect a lot of the Vanguard, but I enjoyed going to court. I enjoyed seeing the actual dynamics of everybody being in the courtroom at the same time and calling up witnesses and attorneys and seeing how different cases move around. And then March happened, and then we couldn't do that anymore. So the change between going to in-person court to doing court over Zoom was interesting. It was difficult to adjust, but it was also it was an interesting transformational period for me when I had to adjust how I would take notes and how I would write my articles. But the past almost 2 years that I've been with the Vanguard have been very valuable to me.
Yeah, it's, there are trade-offs in everything. And so, I miss going to court in person and being able to, watch from that vantage point. On the other hand, we get the dynamic of, hey, I'm checking out of Sacramento Department 63 and I'm going into Fresno Department 9. And which you could never do before because that's like a 4-hour drive. So there are advantages. And we learned, pretty quickly, I think, that, hey, we can actually organize and coordinate all these interns all over the state over Zoom, which we never really thought we could do. We didn't really, or at least I didn't really know about Zoom prior to that. And now it's like, okay, we're probably not going to ever go back to the situation where we're only going to be meeting in the office, and people are going to have to drive up from LA to come, go to our meetings. That's probably never going to happen again. Although it is interesting, like I was talking yesterday with the high school here, and we're probably going to have the high school students come into the office once a week to meet. So kind of a hybrid program, I think. So one of the questions, I guess, is, and I think some of you already touched on this, but what was kind of the biggest surprise watching court cases versus what you thought prior to the internship? Anyone can jump in.
I guess I could start since I already touched on this in that first question you asked. Just to add on a bit to what I said previously, I think people have this perception that court is a lot like it is in the movies, where you have, the defense and the prosecution, and you have all these big moments where, you see, well, like I mentioned previously, theatrics. But a lot of court isn't like that. For much of my shift, they go through maybe like 15 cases, and that's just because they call the person in, they make sure they have their charges and name correctly, and then they assign the public defender. Sometimes you have other things where they read a statement of facts. Sometimes they're just pleading to a no contest. But I think that's the biggest shock that came to me, that court is a lot faster and has a lot less of those big moments than I thought previously.
You know, what surprised you, Lynchy?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to Alexander that I was also surprised how fast the courts usually take and how most of it happens in the pretrial motions rather than the actual trial. And you can really see how, you know, like the judge and all the attorneys are really trying to speed things through because they are just overloaded with cases every day. And many of these people come in not really knowing what's going on because they're using very dense legal language. And even as interns, I think it took a while for me to kind of get used to the court language and understand what everyone's talking about. Like what are these penal codes? Like what are these sentence charges? Why are, you know, they talking in this format? So I can't even imagine, you know, being a defendant in that position and having to absorb all of that. And so, yeah, I just thought it was like a very unfamiliar space and a lot less, like Alexander said, a lot less dramatic than what you might see on TV shows.
And you know, one of the things I think when you watch TV shows, but not just TV shows, like if you watch a trial, maybe on Court TV or on CNN, you know, if it's a high profile trial, you know, the focus on of the media is always, oh, trial, trial, trial. Trials are very rare in the system. That, you know, only like 2 to 3% and shrinking of all cases go to trial. So one of the points I always make to the interns is, yeah, if you're only covering trials, you're missing, you know, 98% of what's happening in the system, which I think most people don't realize because we're just so focused, you know, on the trial aspect. So Julietta, what was most surprising for you?
Yeah, I think similarly to what Lynchy and Alex said, the lack of trials was surprising. I also expected there to be a lot more trials to witness. So it was interesting to see how many cases were being dealt with in just, you know, like an afternoon or a morning period. I used to think it'd be like one case would take an entire morning or something, but on a regular court day, it's not really like that. And also with the legal jargon, that's definitely something that I feel like in movies and TV, they use a different language to explain, or so that, you know, average audience members can understand the proceedings a bit more. But when you're actually in court, they're using that jargon more. So it's another hurdle to overcome to really understand what's going on.
And Lynn?
I think what everyone was talking about how it's a lot different from it is in TV, not just with the theatrics, but I think a lot of times in TV, like for me, I grew up watching a lot of Law and Order, but the prosecution is always portrayed to be the good guys in the media, whereas in real life, it's not always that case. You know, there's a lot of, like the podcast is called Everyday Injustices. There's a lot of injustices in the legal system, in the criminal legal system that I didn't know about before. So it was interesting to see how those worked out when I started interning with the Vanguard.
So since you brought it up, I'll start with you this time. I mean, what was kind of the most shocking thing you've seen?
The most shocking thing I've seen. There were a lot of cases that I've heard that I did not expect to hear in real life, because I know that the stuff, it's horrible, but I know it happens in real life. I just never thought it would pass me. There was a case where it was like an after school daycare teacher or something who was inappropriately texting a 12-year-old, or I don't remember how old she was, but she was a teenager, and they had inappropriate relations with each other. And there was just a lot of evidence that was being brought up that were graphic and just not easy for me to watch as an intern, because it wasn't something I expected to see that day or ever. So that was one of the worst things I've seen in court.
Julietta?
Yeah, for me, I think I saw a lot of domestic violence cases, and it was kind of shocking to see how many there were, just in Yolo County, for instance. And also it was kind of hard listening to some of the witness testimonies and having them relive those experiences and going through the evidence, and also sometimes hearing their testimonies contradict like police testimonies, for instance, and it kind of becomes clear that they're trying to protect the defendant and whatnot. So seeing that kind of play out was very interesting, but also like surprising for me as an intern.
Lynchy?
Yeah, so a specific event that I saw was there was a trial where a homeless woman was a victim to a robbery and assault, and she went up and testified on stand, and they showed the jury this recording of her when she called the police, and she was crying and in tears. But the defense attorney kind of discredited her by saying that she was on drugs and she's homeless, so maybe she was hallucinating the whole situation. And despite the compelling evidence that she was probably telling the truth, the jury kind of came to a dead end, and so they acquitted the defendant. And I think this was shocking to me, because I think even going in, like, I had an idea that, like, prosecutors are harsh and like there are a lot of individuals who are wrongfully incarcerated. I didn't expect to see victims would also be mistreated as well, based on their socioeconomic situation. And so when I saw that, I couldn't stop thinking about it even after watching the live. And it really bothered me, just because for me, like, just because she's homeless, I didn't think that she deserved to be discredited, especially after going through such a horrific event such as that. So yeah, that's something that I remember.
Alex?
That is a good question. That's tough. I mean, just today I saw a few murder cases. One was gang related. Another one had the defendant in possession of like a 45 caliber handgun. I've seen a few. I think I've seen one arson case where the defendant was setting matchsticks in like dry brush, and she didn't notice that a huge fire has started. Of course, someone saw her. She said she didn't mean for anyone to get hurt, and I don't think anyone did. There's been a few pimping cases. That's a lot more common than I thought it was. But I think the two that have stood out to me the most for different reasons. One is a domestic violence dispute that ended with a standoff between the defendant and the police outside of his home. The defendant had his family in with him, and he was threatening to kill them and himself. Eventually, it got to the point where he just started crying and apologizing, and he eventually gave himself up. Thankfully, nothing happened. The other case that's on the opposite side of that spectrum is a cockfighting ring. I remember I told you about this, and that's just crazy because I didn't know that was a thing around here. That like I'm from Mexico, so I know that that's sometimes a thing over there, but for it to be here, like in California, that just blew my mind. And not only that, but like the vernacular that the court used, like it was a count of cockfighting verbatim. That was that stuck out to me just because I thought it was super crazy, and I know I'm probably never gonna see that again. But yeah, two opposite sides of the spectrum that you could see in court, I guess.
Yeah, you just, one of the things I always tell the interns is you're leaving your college bubble and you're going into the real world. And some of these things that you're gonna see are, you don't know that these things are happening. You definitely don't see them from the college campus. So it is kind of unsettling at times to see some of these things. You know, I'd like kind of Lynn and Julietta to talk about, their experience with the student publication. And Julietta, I know you've also done work with the COVID Behind Bars or COVID in Custody project. So maybe you can talk about some of your other experiences.
Yeah, me and Lynn, we were editors-in-chief of the Davis Vanguard UC Davis that we started or helped start last year. And that was a great opportunity to get students more involved um, with not only the campus and city, but social justice issues and also expressing their opinion on certain current events that were happening. And yeah, it was a great experience, seeing our writers grow from the beginning and seeing how much their writing improved. That was really cool to see. And I think it was a good reflection of how the Vanguard has grown as a publication over the year, to go from like an internship program to starting its own student publication. And I thought it was important to have that student voice as well. So I think it was a cool opportunity. And as for the COVID prisons project, I was part of the CDCR group. So I covered the pandemic in California state prisons, and that was a really interesting experience, chronicling that from the beginning of the pandemic and seeing all the number of cases grow and the different outbreaks and deaths that came with the mismanagement of CDCR. And I think that was a really important project, because it really helped humanize many of the incarcerated people who were experiencing this outbreak and not being able to voice their concerns. So I felt like this project helped give them a voice during that situation.
And Lynn?
Yeah, I worked on the Vanguard at UC Davis last year, and I'm continuing to work on it this year. Last year, I was co-editor-in-chief alongside with Julietta, and this year I am working with Jordan Barney. But I think that the student publication is really important because it's news written by students for students, whereas the Vanguard and it's written mostly by interns, but also I believe that the student publication, what we publish, is more accessible to students, and it allows students to read about what's happening in their community, whether it's on campus or happening in the city of Davis or other news and social justice that's happening in Northern California specifically. So it's a really good opportunity for any students who want to write for us or any students who want to read it.
Alex, it seems like you've worked on a bunch of special projects. Does anything kind of stand out?
I'm not sure if these would be considered special projects. More so, I just so happened to stumble across some really interesting cases. I'm not sure if I told you about this. I know I told Michelle, but I know one of them was, let me see, who was it? I think it was, oh yeah, it was an influencer who was, I think, being accused of fraud or something like that because he had a, I guess, charity, and I think he connected it to a adoption clinic, right? But a reporter started looking into the adoption clinic, and on the address that was listed on his website, there was no mention or any adoption clinic there, right? So she started looking more into him. Eventually, the guy filed a wasn't a harassment report. What was it? A stay away order, a protective order. It was one of those. Basically, you just stay away from me. You can't be anywhere near me. And that was weird because I've never seen one of those cases before, and still I haven't seen one of those cases. I know another one that stood out was a governor case. Another influencer was trying to run for governor, and oh, right. The problem was on the ballot, he included, I think, an alias or something along those lines, and that's against ballot law or something like that, where you can't have an alias on the ballot because it's unfair, right? So if Arnold Schwarzenegger were to put Arnold the Terminator Schwarzenegger, that would be illegal because people would vote for him only because of the Terminator, and it's it's a knowledgeable brand. That was interesting, one, because it's another influencer, and two, it's ballot law for something as big and high profile as a governor election. Eventually the court just ruled against him, like, yeah, you can't put your alias or something that you considered a nickname on the ballot. And he said that kind of ruined his whole I guess race. I'm not sure if I could give out the name right here, so I'll just hold that. But it was definitely a couple of the most interesting cases I've seen. I've also been part of some wrongful conviction cases. Those were really interesting. Actually, I'm about to finish with one. I'm about to finish with another one, I think, this coming weekend. So yeah, that's also crazy because there's a lot more of those than I thought. Like the fact that there's that many people that may be wrongfully behind bars is crazy. I'm not gonna say it shook my, belief in the justice system, but it's definitely changed my viewpoint on it.
And Lynchy, tell us about your experience. You did quite a few things too.
Yeah, so like Alexander, I also took on a wrongful conviction case. I collaborated with two other interns in writing an article about Bart McNeil, who was wrongfully convicted for murdering his 3-year-old daughter. And we got to have in contact with his cousin, who gave us all the court documents, the evidence that he investigated him in himself, and also like a lot of the original testimony. We also got to talk to Bart himself as well to give his own insight about the experience and also his time in prison. So that was a very eye-awakening moment for me. And I think that was the longest article that I've written. And I'm very proud of the finished product. And I also worked in a project with other interns as well called the SB 1437 project. And what that was is we just looked into the effectiveness of the new California reformed felony murder rule to see how many defendants who have been convicted from the old felony murder rule are now successfully petitioning for their release. And so that was really interesting as well, because I got to learn, more about the history of felony murder, and also given the data that we collected, I also saw, like even with the new law, it takes years and a lot of efforts from advocates and legislatures to actually push the courts to, be proactive in making sure these defendants are being released. So yeah.
All right. So kind of as we close this out, maybe each of you tell us what you're going to remember about this internship when you think back on it in 20 years. Lynchy, why don't you start?
Okay. I think, given 20 years, what I going to definitely look back to is just, I think in general, giving me a very, I think that opportunity to explore social justice and criminal justice very up close. Because I think, even just as an undergrad, you don't have a lot of opportunities where you can like go out into the real world and see some of the injustices that are happening in our criminal justice system. And the Vanguard is not just about Court Watch. We just mentioned that you can involved in a lot of projects. You can be involved in like very extended wrongful conviction cases, and just that alone gives you a lot of exposure to what's going on. And I think it gives me a foundation of what I want to do moving forward. It also gives me more confidence that I do want to become an attorney and hopefully, continue pursuing social justice. So yeah, I would say that would be my biggest takeaway.
Lynn?
For me, in 20 years, I'll be 40. And I want to be a journalist. So for me, looking back at the Vanguard in 20 years, I will see it as my first opportunity for reporting. And the Vanguard has given me such a strong foundation that it's kind of hard to forget it. Like when she said, it's given me a lot of exposure to real social justice issues that I've never had the chance to know about before coming to write for the Vanguard, because I get assignments and I read about them and they're really interesting, and so I enjoy reporting about them, and so that's what I think I'm gonna remember the most about it.
Julietta?
Yeah, like Lynn, I think the one thing I always remember the Vanguard for was being my first like real journalism experience. Before the Vanguard, I wrote for the California Aggie as an opinion columnist, but I think the Vanguard was my first real exposure into journalism, and I've learned so much from writing a really catchy lead to fact checking certain information. I think this experience has been very valuable and has informed my reporting, and even I've learned so much about the legal system, and those different sides has really helped me be more confident that this is the career that I want to do. So I really appreciate the Vanguard for that.
And then Alex?
That's really scary saying 20 years from now. And when Lynn said, "Oh, I'm gonna be 40," I'm like, "Oh, you're right. We're gonna be old."
Hey, wait a second.
Wait, no, I'm sorry. You don't look a day past 21, David. But it's a scary thought. I was thinking about all the articles I've written, and what Julietta, right? Right. What she said was right, like how to write a lead and all that. But I think the first thought that came to my head was that the world is a lot bigger and a lot more complicated than I thought it was, right? You have a lot of people who are doing bad things out there, but you also have a lot of people doing good things out there. You have people who, are said to have done bad things, but they haven't, right? And seeing just how much is out there, I guess, is going to stick with me a long time. That there's like a murder case every now and then, there's a DUI case every now and then. I'm not sure if I thought those didn't happen as much as I thought before, but I guess it just wasn't in my mind as much that, yeah, these things are happening out there. And I guess I'm making it sound like it's going to scar me for life. It's not. It's just, it's changed my perception on the world, definitely.
It's interesting listening, especially to them react to 20 years, because I'm kind of at the age where, looking back 20 years doesn't feel very long. I was already in Davis 20 years ago. In fact, it was barely 20 years ago, this month that 9/11 happened, which was for me a big formative event that will always stand in my mind, and it's mind-boggling to me that 20 years has gone on. And then I think, oh, and Lynn said, oh, I'll be 40 in 20 years. And I'm like, I'll be almost 70 in 20 years. So yeah, but I'm not old. No, but I think kind of the cool thing with the pandemic has been that while I've never actually met either Alex or Lynchy in person. I have met Lynn and Julietta. I feel like I've gotten to know them over the last year and a half pretty well. And unfortunately, I don't get to know all the interns that well. In fact, some, I will admit, they asked for a letter of recommendation, and I got to go, okay, let's see when they were here, because it really does all fly by and mix together. I mean, we started this in 2010, and we had like 5 interns at Round Table Pizza, which is not even open anymore in South Davis. And we would sit around the table and have pizza and talk about going into the court. And to think where we've come in just 11 years time is really amazing. And these 4, former interns are people that I'll definitely remember for a long time. Alex for his crazy cases that he ran into, Julietta and Lynn for their amazing leadership, Lynchy for her amazing job with our social media program, which she didn't really touch on that much. So it's just, we've gotten just these opportunities. And the other thing I'm really grateful for, and I was looking back on this a month or so ago, how many students we've had that have gone on to go to law school. A lot of them are now lawyers. It's really, cool. It's like, hey, these people turned out pretty well. And for a lot of them, the Vanguard was a really formative experience. So, it warms my heart. So I want to thank you guys for coming on and having this brief conversation. We could probably talk all day about all the things that we've seen in court. I know I could. But this has been Everyday Injustice. I'm David Greenwald, the host, and join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.